Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the opportunity to sit down and chat with amazing humans about their journeys with mental health. For this episode, I'm so happy to introduce Bev to the conversation. Welcome, Bev.
Hello, hi, thank you.
Hello, hi, thank you. You're more than welcome. I love that start. So as I will always do, just a very brief introduction from me as to how Bev and I know each other, and then I'll get you to do a proper introduction, Bev, first, so everybody can really understand what you're all about and what you're doing. But Bev and I, we know each other through the world of business travel, global business travel, and Bev's going to tell you more about her role. But I guess we only really got introduced last year when Bev asked me to participate in an article or something that was being written, a piece of content for the business travel world, talking about mental health, talking about traveller well-being and the work that I was doing in there. So we sort of stayed in touch since then. We actually managed to meet up in person for the first time at a conference recently. Yeah, little dance, happy dance. And it's just been great because, you know, we're still continuing these conversations. Bev, I'm going to throw it over to you though, because you can tell people all about you, who you are and what you do.
Oh, good. Okay, so I am Beth Ferris. I am the editor of the Business Travel magazine, which is how I know Matt. I have been a travel journalist for, 30 years or so, I think, which is quite scary. I started off in business travel, funnily enough, and then kind of moved into other areas. And then I've come back to business travel, which has been really nice because a lot of the people that I met back in my early career, my mid-20s, are still knocking around, and some of the issues are still the same, but there's been so much that's happened since then. It's a completely different industry, completely different world, obviously, particularly at the moment with COVID. I actually started the job in the midst of the first lockdown, so it's been quite an interesting time. And as Matt said, you and I didn't meet until quite recently, and there's been loads of people that I didn't meet for many, many months when I first started my job, and it's been amazing. And I'm actually quite gutted this week that things are starting to go a bit the other way again, because I was really enjoying it. I was really enjoying getting back out there again and seeing people, and you know, as you and I know, when you go to events, you get to know people a lot better than you would on a Zoom meeting. So I'm just hoping it's just a temporary blip and we're all back to where we were before in a few weeks time, hopefully.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm 100% with that as well. And the travel industry has been absolutely sucker punched many times over the last 18, 20 months or so, isn't it? And it's just keeps on, you know, it's like an everyday change, isn't it? So we keep our fingers crossed. We keep positive that the future's going to be bright for the industry again very soon. So the reason for this conversation, though, is for you to talk a little bit about your journey and to explore a few of those ideas around, you know, where you've been, what you've been through, and your experience of life. That's what this is all for. So the big question, your journey with mental health, I'll leave that with you. You can go with whatever you like to say.
Whatever I like to say. See, I'm one of those people, I have to say, that I kind of feel like I've been quite blessed in my life. There's been, certainly my childhood was a very kind of easy ride. I, had a happy family environment. I loved school. I didn't have any problems with any of the issues I know some, people do have. I went to university. I always knew I wanted to be a journalist, and I became a journalist. I didn't necessarily want to be a travel journalist, but I wanted to be a newsreader when I was
Right.
that was so I guess in a way I haven't fulfilled that dream, but perhaps these podcasts go some way to here I am today being recorded. But I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I kind of had quite a straightforward run. And then I started being a travel journalist, and I know that when you and I spoke right at the beginning, Matt, you yourself had had some experience of traveling a lot and the stresses and strains that it put on you. And I have to say, probably, if I'm going to talk about mental health related to business travel, there was a time in my career when I was traveling too much, a bit like you, and it was, I wouldn't say I had any kind of particular breakdown, but it was certainly affecting my, I felt tired, I felt exhausted. It got to the stage where I wasn't really enjoying the travel. I was basically working at a magazine where I was the only person in the office that was in a situation where I could travel. I was, single, didn't have any family commitments, and so every trip that came in, they were like, "Can you go?" And I didn't have to go, to be honest with you. But you kind of go, "Oh, I've this all sounds great. I can go to this place and
Yeah.
that place. And just, you know, some of the trips were incredible. Some of them, you know, I found myself in some amazing luxury resorts, you know, with my own butler, but completely on my own and thinking, what the hell am I doing here? I'd rather be at home,
Yeah.
you know, watching telly, which makes, you know, it sounds so ungrateful. And my friends were all just so terribly jealous of me, you know, going off here and there. But in fact, it wasn't enjoyable. I think at that time, I actually, one of the most amazing trips that I went on, in theory, was I went to the Galapagos Islands.
Right.
And while I was there, I actually had a bit of I don't know, looking back now, I'm wondering whether I had some kind of reaction to the malaria tablets. We had to take malaria tablets. And it was the only time I've really ever felt really quite low.
Okay.
And I shouldn't have been, because I was on this, you know, incredible cruise around the Galapagos Islands. You know, I was with actually the other journalists on the trip weren't particularly my kind of people, I have to say, but that's not a problem. But I just felt really down. I started to sort of question what I was doing with my career. I was commuting up to London from Brighton at the time, on the terrible Thameslink train, when it was a complete nightmare and there were always cancellations. And I loved my job, but I didn't really like the commute. And anyway, I was kind of getting a bit off track here. When I was away, feeling quite low, it was in the time before mobile phones. Can you believe that? There was a time before mobile phones.
Was there?
So you couldn't actually,
a
long time ago, I couldn't actually contact my anyone back home. But I did actually, we went onto one of the islands one day and there was a phone box, and I rang my mum just to say hi and let her know that I was doing okay. And I just knew that something was amiss for my mum. She wasn't going to tell me, but I said, Mum, I can tell there's something not quite right. And my grandma had ended up in hospital. She'd had a stroke, and I was desperately close to my grandma.
Right.
And I, obviously, for the rest of the trip, I was just absolutely, you know, devastated and worried. Came back, and at the same time, where I was working, there were some redundancies that were having to be made, and I was in charge of a team. We'd taken a lot of people to launch a website. And I was told, right, you've got to make some redundancies. And I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to make these redundancies, because these are all people that I've recruited. And I'm sick of the commute. I'm going to actually make myself redundant. So I basically resigned, and I don't know, looking back now, whether it was something that was, you know, again, the malaria tablets had affected the way I was thinking, but I did it, and I went freelance, and it was the best thing I did. You know, I managed to have that. Because I wasn't having to travel as much as I was before, I could pick and choose what I was doing. I was also working from home in Brighton. I got a shared office space with some friends, and suddenly my whole life was completely changed. And I really enjoyed living, you know, in Brighton. It was, you know, I was getting the full benefit of it. I had some really good friends that I shared an office with. I was traveling still, but not as much. And yeah, for many, many years, I carried on being a freelancer and absolutely loved it. Shall I carry on, or are you going to ask?
No, you carry on. It's your airtime.
So that's one of I mean, as I said, I don't think I was, you know, necessarily in a depression, but it was certainly something which changed my way of thinking. So I went freelance, many years. While in Brighton, I met my now. What age was I here? This is the other thing that I can talk about in relation to mental health. I was about 33, 34, we got together.
Okay.
So not particularly late in the day, but fairly late, and quite quickly he moved in, and, you know, not quite quickly, but within, you know, 6 months to a year. And then we started talking about having, you know, do we want children? Yeah, we do want children. And then we decided, well, you know, if we both want children, then maybe we should start trying for children. And obviously I was, you know, getting to mid-30s. So it didn't happen straight away. It took many years, 4 or 5 years, a lot of hospital visits. Eventually, you know, when we realized things weren't going to happen, we spent a lot of time being investigating what's the problem. No problem was ever particularly found, other than the fact that my sort of fertility age was more than it, higher than it would have been for somebody of my age. So we were kind of all, we were kind of already a few years behind. But yeah, that was probably the hardest time of my life, in that we were just both really, really wanting to have a child, and it just wasn't happening. And things kind of, in the meantime, obviously, all of our friends were, popping out kids left, right, and centre, and and their lives were moving on, and we were still in this kind of place where we were just, just wasn't happening. And I think I was lucky then that I wasn't still working in London and commuting in, because obviously that takes a lot of, I don't know if anyone out there's gone through, but it takes a lot of time and energy. And I think if I, there were days when I was, obviously every month you're like, oh, this is going to happen, it's going to happen, and it doesn't happen, and you're upset. And if I was in that office environment, I think it would have been quite tough to deal with all that. But because I was, working from home and sharing office with friends, it was a much more easy ride for me, although, it was difficult. Anyway, there's a happy ending before anyone worries. We eventually had, we had one IVF session on the NHS, which was a total disaster. I didn't respond to the drugs, and was pretty much told by an absolute bastard of a doctor that it's never going to happen. And meanwhile, he's looking at his watch because it's nearly lunchtime, and he's like, "Who's
really?
Yeah." And anyway, then we coincidentally we lived in Hove, and my husband at that time was a photographer, and he basically had been asked to do a photo shoot of a new fertility clinic that had opened up around the corner. So he had come home with me with this brochure, and was sort of in the early days of us trying. Oh, look, I said, oh, yeah, brilliant. Anyway, the NHS was saying, you've had your one shot, it's not going to happen. So we were kind of, what do we do now? We were looking into egg donation and all sorts of things. And then he said, well, let's just go and speak to these people at this clinic. Went along, he told them what had happened, what our journey had been, and they were like, let's just, we don't think there's a reason why it was kind of bad luck. Let's give it another go. And we thought, they're just after our money. Obviously, we're paying for this. We did the first stage, and we got a pretty weak result, but it was something to work with. So we went through. We had the two. Normally, I don't know if do you know much about IVF, but you won't guess you.
No, not personally. No.
Right. No. You usually get. You're giving lots of drugs to stimulate your to get things to get more eggs. So you normally end up with a couple of dozen, and then they pick out the best ones. I ended up with, I think, 3, and only 2 were even worth doing anything with. So anyway, we went through thinking there's absolutely no way it's gonna happen. But by a complete miracle, and I do think it's a miracle, I got pregnant, and we have a son who's now 12, and after years and years of trying, it was just the best thing ever. It was just, whenever I feel a bit low about anything now, because I remember at the time thinking, all I want in life is just to have a child, and if whatever else happens, I'll be happy. And so whenever I do feel that things are getting a bit too much, I just think, do you know what, I've got my son, and it was completely worth the wait. He's amazing, not always amazing, he's in the arse sometimes, but most of the time, and I feel it's completely blessed. And I have friends who were in the same boat who still haven't had a child, and they're now in their 50s, and they presumably they never will, and I just feel so sad for them, and grateful that I was one of the lucky ones, even if I had a bit of a journey. And I know other people have journeys a lot harder than I had. And I think I was listening to something on the radio recently about a poor, people who've been in this COVID lockdown. Obviously everything was cancelled, and when your biological clock's ticking and you're desperately wanting to have this treatment, I was thinking that must be really, really hard for people. I was just putting myself in that situation and thinking what it would have been like if I'd have been told, well, I'm sorry, everything's shut now and you can't have your treatment until whenever we open the hospital again. So it's there's my story.
Wow. It's fascinating. Pardon, what was that?
I said, there you go, there's my story. What else? There
you go. But you said something to me before we recorded, actually, that you didn't think you had a story, and you've just told me the full story. And it's your story, and it's that thing about others have it worse, and I always think about that and think, but your journey is your story, and it's your journey, isn't it? So as much as we try to validate and compare it and contrast it with other thoughts, it's still what you've been through. And what I can hear from you is you've been through an experience of life where there's been some really positive stuff, like your son, and questionable whether a 12-year-old son is an exciting experience at the moment. Maybe, I don't know. I know from experience of having two girls who are teenagers, and that brings about its own set of
sure.
challenges. I think boys maybe, well, I'm not going to say it. I was going to say a bit easier. But I don't want to jinx anybody.
I've got all that to come.
Yeah, but enjoy it when it's still good. But it really is fascinating. I'm going to touch on sort of a couple of points in there, if that's okay, and sort of that piece when you were away and things weren't going so well. So this is going back a little while, of course, and you were feeling low. How did you come out of that? Was that because you changed and you took that redundancy that you felt all of a sudden that pressure changed, or what was the catalyst for that change of feeling?
Well, I think the malaria tablets will probably wore off. I mean,
right, okay. That's interesting. I've never heard that.
I've literally never felt, obviously you have times where you feel a bit fed up. Is my internet connection okay?
Okay, no,
saying it's not.
It came a little slow there. It wasn't.
Okay, so yeah, I was just saying, I that was the only time I really felt low, really, like I didn't really want to, get up and go on the amazing trip to the Galapagos, which is just
it's incredible.
But I think basically just taking that the pressure away of the daily commute for a start, and I think it just sort of gave me some space and a bit of time just to and I think, going back to obviously my nan, she passed away some months later, but there was a time when she needed a lot of we were seeing her. She went into hospital, and I spent a lot of time. I moved it down to my parents. My parents had to go away. My sister was living in Canada at the time. My parents went to see her, so I moved down to their house, and I was sort of visiting her every day in hospital. And that wouldn't have been possible had I still had the job in London. So that decision, I think, even though I didn't know what was going to happen, it kind of did, and and ultimately kind of probably led to me meeting my now husband and all those things that change. Other than that, I've been quite lucky. I have never felt. I'm quite a happy, positive person. But I do, and we mentioned it earlier, running. I do think that running and exercise has helped me considerably. And I didn't start really doing that until I was in my mid-20s, and I lived with a girl in London. There's about 5 of us shared a house in Clapham, and she was the most positive, lovely, happy person, and she ran every day. And at that point I didn't run. I did a lot of sport at school, but I didn't really, when you get to university or when you're a teenager, you don't really keep it up. So I thought, what, I'm just going to give it a go. So me and another girl in the house decided to sort of prod around Clapham Common one morning. And from it was really hard to start with. I realized I didn't have very good shoes as well, which didn't help. But I got some decent running shoes, and then from that day on, I've just been completely addicted to running. My husband would tell you, if I don't go at least sort of 2 or 3 times a week, I'll get a little bit agitated and not a very nice person to be. I need to go, mentally, and it's where I do all my thinking, and it's where I don't do yoga or anything. My relaxation is to go for a really good run, although I don't run as much as I used to. I wasn't doing marathons like you're doing still, a half maybe, but certainly not a full one. But I still need, I do think it's kind of kept me, if I go for a run or do anything in the morning, it makes me a lot more, I can think straighter, and I'm a lot more together for the rest of the day. So I think that's really helped.
Well, I love that answer. Correct answer.
Correct answer.
But I love it because it's something I can connect to as well, and I'm sure many people listening. And I know, I'm part of a running club and community, and I always share this with them as well. These episodes, and to hear the benefits of running only enhances the need to go out and do it regularly, right? It really helps when we know it.
Sorry, going back to the commute. When you're doing a long commute every day, that sort of restricts your chance to do that. So I think when you're so I think this, although I'm not sure about home working for the younger generation, I do worry about how they're going to cope with not, as I think back to my 20s, my social life revolved around work. So I think it's, but certainly from a from a health point of view, I think it does give you the opportunity to, to running, to do things, to nip to the local gym in your lunchtime, and all the things that, you suddenly you've got that extra time of your day when you're not sitting on a train to do some of the things which would, hopefully help with your mental health.
I think, and I totally agree with that. And I think the biggest challenge in the balance at the moment is whose time is the commuting time. And I think so often people just sacrifice that by going, well, I can log on to my emails early and I can finish later because I don't have to sit on the train. And actually, as I tried to remind people, we actually never gave that to our businesses when we were commuting. So that was all our time, wasn't it? And it's that balancing point, isn't it? So I totally hear what you're saying. I do want to go to the conversation a little bit around your experience with, having a baby and getting pregnant and everything else, because I'm sure no doubt there'll be people listening who may be going through experiences like that or been through. In terms of sort of the mental impact of that, I do want to explore that just slightly, both from your perspective and your husband's, if that's okay. Yeah. How would you define that? What was going on? I guess, I can only guess what was going on.
Yeah, so it was tough, I have to say. And I do, I kind of think if a relationship can get through that, then you kind of onto a good one. It wasn't easy. He's 4 years younger than me, so I think I always had this kind of like, he could be with somebody younger, and so there was, it literally went from, obviously to start with, we didn't really think anything, we just wanted to have a baby, and we knew it wasn't going to happen sort of, in the first month. But as time went on, you go through a whole load of emotions, and part of mine was kind of like, oh God, am I sort of stopping him from being the one who's going to have his family? And I had this sort of guilt thing, which he just thinks, he says that's ridiculous. He obviously didn't think that at all, but that's how I was feeling. I felt a lot of resentment to people, and I feel terrible about this now, and I could look back and think, God, it was awful. But I felt a lot of resentment for my friends around me that were having children, and weren't having the problem. They were like, oh, we just went out and got drunk one night, and we and it happened. Why don't you just? And the amount of people said to me, if you just relax and not worry, if you stop thinking about it, it will happen. And I have to say, I wanted to punch a few people when they said that to me.
Really? Yeah.
You say, well, you can't just suddenly decide to switch off your desire to have a family. It doesn't really work like that. So it's all very. It was. I felt quite a lot of resentment. My best friend actually had a baby, and I remember just being really. And two of my best friends had children at the same time, and they started kind of doing baby thing. They sort of obviously they started hanging out together, and I did. It was tough. I kind of felt quite. It sounds quite resentful, and I wasn't happy about it. I wasn't, I should have been really happy for them, but I wasn't. I felt quite, quite upset, and kind of, I basically wanted to be kind of, part of that club, and I wasn't part of that club. It was tough. Obviously, at the same time, my mum was desperately wanting to be a grandma, so
another pressure.
Another pressure. I had, terrible kind of. I wanted to make it happen for her as well, and she was just, she didn't put any pressure on at all. But when we were, in fact, she was the first person that we told that when I was pregnant, that we literally just sort of turned up on a doorstep, didn't even tell we were coming. We just said, because she knew we were having the treatment. She didn't know when the result. We told her, we lied and told her that the results were due, that we would find out a day after we actually found out. So I just wanted to sort of prepare myself. I was convinced wasn't going to happen. So we just turned up on the doorstep the day before she thought we were going to get the results, and told her. That was incredible. It was tough. It was a tough time. But like anything, you kind of look back now and you go, it was worth it. And
that's good.
But when you're in it, you just think it's never going to happen. I wouldn't want to do it all again. And I've got friends now who've got nieces who are going through the same thing, and I just really feel for them. I think, unless you've been there, people say, oh, you're not ill. I remember listening to some discussion on the radio about, people shouldn't be given, IVF, and why is it, free on national health, and it's not. But it is actually, it's a huge, it is a mental health issue. If you're if you spend your whole life, man or woman, thinking that you're going to have a family, and then it just doesn't happen, then you do everything you can to try and make it happen. And obviously we were looking into adoption at the same time, but
sure.
that actually at the time was difficult. There were very few opportunities to adopt children. I think it's actually better now if you wanted to adopt, but I think at that time it was, there were huge waiting lists. It was going to take years, and because of I was creeping up to the age of 40, it wasn't necessarily going to be the case of me being able to have I might have been able to have an older child, which obviously then brings other complications. So it was a tough time, but I guess it strengthened our relationship, and it's made us probably more. I'm sure everybody appreciates their children, but I think if you have to sort of have a big. He doesn't actually know, my son, that he's an IVF child. We will tell him. I think it's funny. It's amazing what amount of people you meet that are also, when you talk to people who've had children who IVF, and funny enough, we drive past the clinic quite a lot when he used to go to a little French club, and I used to drive past the clinic, and I thought, I'm just going to say to him, that's where you conceived.
Amazing.
There. I think when he's on biology and he understands a bit more about how. He probably doesn't already understand how babies are made, but
They already know a lot. Don't worry about that. But I think it's fascinating, Bev, and I just huge thank you for sharing all of that as well, and that experience and the journey that you've been on, and you that's going to help other people, and I really do genuinely believe that, to know it's hard when you're in it, and it's so true about everything that impacts on our mental health, because that's ultimately, of course, there's a physical part to it. Having a baby piece, it's quite a physical piece, isn't it? But it also has a mental impact, and that's what we're trying to extract and think about in these conversations. It's not just the physical element, and that's sometimes where we get struck with that thought of it's all physical, and it's not. It all has an impact, doesn't it? We are coming right towards the end of this, believe it or not. It's incredible, isn't it? You said, I don't know if I can talk for this. So as I will always do, I'm going to sort of ask you to do a little wrap up around your sort of what you want to share, any thoughts and so on. So just a huge thank you from me to you, really. Firstly, is the most important thing, because you said you would participate in recording a conversation with me, and I love that, because that was fantastic. So any final thoughts from you, Bev? Anything you want to share with anybody out there?
I would just say, if you don't already, just try running.
Okay.
I have to say now, I've had a few injuries recently, and I've got walking has become a dog and a lockdown puppy. So walking is just as good as running. Actually, I say that I do prefer running, but walking is the second best thing to running.
Yep.
And if you are going through, the whole fertility journey, then best of luck, and just don't give up, and try and I guess it's amazing. Talk to other people, because it's amazing how many, particularly now, I think, with the way that people's lives are, so busy, and I think it's becoming more and more common for people to have fertility issues, and people are leaving it later and later for whatever reason. So I think just don't think you're on your own, because you're not. There's loads of people, and I think I'm quite vocal about it. It's amazing how many other people you get chatting to, even in supermarket queues, who've particularly they've got twins. You always have to go, oh, and then it always, often turns out that they've had IVF. So and I'm also looking forward to speaking to you in a minute. I'm doing a podcast with Matt in a minute for podcasts. It's weird, Matt, I have to say, being the person on the other end. So be prepared. I was actually saying to Matt before we started, I was probably much more nervous about doing this than any of the ones I've done, when I've been the one asking the questions, because it's weird being in the spotlight.
How do you feel now that you've...
I feel like I've had some kind of therapy session.
There we go. But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Oh, and the dog's arrived just in time, right? But that's the reality of this, isn't it? It is a therapy session in many ways, because that's what therapy is about. It's just talking about some of those things that we've been through, or experiences we're going through, and that's what it's all there for. So I will be recording very shortly with you, Bev, like literally in a few minutes, when we switch off this Zoom and go on to another one. What is the name of your podcast, Bev? Let people know where they can find you.
called Checking In With, and it's on the Business Travel magazine website.
And we'll put links to it in the post for this one as well. Gosh, so I'm really looking forward to the long list of questions that you've got to ask me as well. As I will always say at the end of these podcasts, huge thank you, Bev, for participating firstly. But secondly, if anybody is struggling, if you do need extra help, you are not alone. And you, Bev, you made that very clear as well. Please don't think that you're going through this journey of life without any support or anybody there that can support you. So please know that. If you do need to talk in confidence with somebody, you can always call Samaritans 116 123. Please, know that they're always there every day, all day to support you. I'm very proud as a Samaritan, of course, so I would say that. But also, if you want to text, you can text to Shout 85258, and there are many other organizations out there that are there just to support you, to listen, and to give you that little bit of comfort and support to know that there's somebody always there. Right, we are done. So thank you, Bev. I would say I'll see you soon, but I will literally see you in a moment. Thank you very much. It's been lovely to talk to you. Take care.
Take care. Bye.